everybody. Welcome to the Nothing is Wasted podcast. I'm your host, Aubrey Sampson, and we have an incredible conversation for you today with someone that I have gotten to know and started following and really, really love learning from. That's Dr. Ingrid Faro. She writes and teaches a lot about the concept of demystifying evil. She has a book out with InterVarsity Press on the topic, Demystifying Evil. She's an affiliate professor of Old Testament. She coordinates an Old Testament University College program. The woman is a genius, but she also knows pain and suffering. She has walked through a lot of heartache in her life. So it's not just that she understands pain and understands evil and understands grief from an academic perspective, although she certainly does. She knows it personally, and God has met her like God has met so many of you in her valley. And so I know you're going to be encouraged by our conversation. I also want to give you a special invitation. Seminary Now has invited our Nothing is Wasted listeners to go to their website. You can go to seminarynow.co/Sampson, Sampson, and you can use the code Aubrey25 to get a discount on Ingrid's course, Seminary Now, or any of their other courses as well. So I'd love to invite you to do that. But without further ado, let's go ahead and take a listen to my conversation with Dr. Ingrid Faro. Well, hey, Dr. Ingrid Faro, welcome to the Nothing is Wasted podcast. We are so glad that you're here today.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here too. Thanks, Aubrey.
Okay, this is really fun. I want our listeners to know a few things. I want them to know, one, that you and I have some mutual friends. And so that's kind of fun because I feel like I'm just having coffee with an amazing woman that I wanted to hang out with. And two, we're here to talk about some of your work in demystifying evil and darkness and lament and suffering. Very nothing is wasted of you. While the solar eclipse is happening.
Yes, it's perfect timing.
It is perfect timing. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, the sky's kind of green where I am. It's turning a little darker, so we've got weird lighting. So but it just fits perfectly.
Yeah, if you're watching this on YouTube, you might see Ingrid and my cameras just slowly go dark as the moon slowly goes in front of the sun. So it's very, it's on brand for Nothing is Wasted.
Yes, perfect. It's perfect.
All right. So Ingrid, I would love for you to just begin by introducing yourself to our listeners who may not be familiar with you or your work yet, and tell us a little bit about your story as well. What even got you into starting to write and to minister in this, teach in this space?
Yeah, well, right now I'm professor of Old Testament at Northern Seminary, and it's really great working with students. But I started out as a dietitian, and then I was in the insurance industry for about 20 years and creating programs and businesses. But that was just the visible side. Behind the scenes, I had experienced for a long time a lot of abuse, a lot of trauma. My first husband was training to be a pastor, had a third of the New Testament memorized, but he was unfaithful and violent. And so he could stand up, give a perfect 3-point sermon and come home, lock me out of the house. And when after he broke my nose, I finally called the pastor because I was taught my job was to be the submissive wife and make him look good and be supportive and everything. But when I finally did call the pastor, all he said was, "Go home and love your husband." That was it. No further conversation. Yeah. So I've experienced a little bit of church hurt also. I was in a church where we had doilies and, women had to be silent in the church, except you could sing songs with everybody else.
Oh, you were allowed to do that? They let you sing songs?
As long as we were in the back, part of the congregation. So, So I really I was deconstructing my faith before it became a term.
Before it was even a term, right?
Yes. Yeah. It was like, God. And I remember one specific point where I said, God, the only reason that I still believe in you is that I know I've experienced your presence.
Wow.
And so I said, I know that you're there, but I have no idea what's going on in my life. And I was done. There came a point where I was done with church. I isolated myself. And so I did go through a divorce because he refused to admit laying a hand on me. And he was put us deeply in debt, and he had been unfaithful. But then I thought, okay, now I've got a big D on my chest. I will never be in ministry. And that had been my dream, was to be in ministry. So things continued to happen, and my book tells it. The book Demystifying Evil intertwines my story with the theology and the things that God taught me. But eventually, it led me to seminary. Eventually, I started to reconnect with God, who said, "You go get answers for yourself from Scripture, and you get it from the Hebrew and the Greek." So
that's awesome, Ingrid. You're getting the real answers.
Yeah, I'm not just taking what somebody else says. So I dug in. Yeah.
I'm first of all, thank you for sharing that part of your journey. And I'm so sorry that's part of your journey. I'm so sorry for the abuse you experienced and the abuse from your husband in the church. But thank you for sharing that. And thank you for listening to God saying, go back and get those answers.
Yes.
I really, I just honor your faithfulness in that way. Thank you for that.
Yeah. But I tell you, at this point in my life, and it sounds so strange to people, but I understand the Job 42. I understand the closing part of Job so well, because before I heard of God with the hearing of my ears, but through these things, I came to encounter God.
Amen.
And I did not know when I was in seminary, even starting my PhD program, I did not know if God was good. I didn't know if he was just, and I didn't know if he loved me.
Wow.
And so I came in with tons of questions, but God met me in my questions. And now it's like, I'm just so excited.
Come on.
So the name of your pod, Nothing is Wasted. God is the master recycler.
That's right.
He takes, and I even have something like this in my book. God takes the fertilizer of our life. Yes. Turns it under when we allow him to, upturn the ground and then plant something new, and it flourishes. So that is the story of my life. Yeah.
I think what I'm fascinated by is the fact that you're in this kind of nothing is wasted space about grief and about lament and about pain and about evil. You you're doing it at an academic level, but because you've lived it, it's also very personal. And I find that academics can be personal, but I guess the question I have in that is, as God was answering your questions, at what point did you decide, okay, now I'm going to focus on this and write about it for other people?
Well, that took some time, but actually, even during my MDiv program, my advisor also had a degree in counseling. And he had actually been roommates with Larry Crabb. So,
no way!
Wow. Yeah. And so he encouraged me as I started to say, I would just disclose a teeny bit of my story. And he encouraged me to tell my story. And I remember the first time he asked me then to tell my story to another group in seminary. We called them formation groups. And, I was pretty intimidated by the thought, but afterward, a woman from the group, a fellow student, came up and shared her story of abuse from her husband, who had been a pastor, and she had never shared it with anybody. And we're still best friends, we're still really close. So these years, and she's also a professor of Old Testament. So,
really? Are you serious?
Yeah. She did her dissertation on lament while I was doing mine on evil.
Wait, no way. That's amazing.
Yeah. So we've been able to collaborate and have great conversations through the years. But I found every time I shared my story, somebody would come forward. And so that became part of the healing process, to discover that the healing that I was still going through, and we go through it our whole lives. There are always more things that more lies that we believe that we don't even recognize until it comes forward. These little triggers in our life and so forth. Anytime I overreact to a situation, I'm like, I wonder what the root of that, I wonder what that's tied to. And I go back to Jesus and say, okay, show me where that's connected. But and so part of the healing journey becomes walking with Jesus through these things and sharing it with other people. And so telling our story is so important. And that's, of course, why I love the Old Testament. It's all story, and it's all stories of just messed up people. They're all a mess.
They're all a mess.
They're all a mess.
I love that reminder because, there's that whole sort of motif, like, I'm going to be a little stereotypical here, okay? But like 7 leadership tips according to Abraham or whoever, Moses, David.
Yes.
And you're like, 1, I don't know if that's what the Bible's really doing, but 2, like, they're a mess.
They're a mess.
Let's not take the leadership lessons.
No.
Let's talk about what God's doing. How about that? What's God doing?
Yes, exactly. Yep. There are no heroes in Scripture other than Jesus. Every one of them, we're supposed to learn from how God redeems their mess and works in and through their lives in the midst of all that. And that's what's so miraculous.
That's right. It's good news for us too, right? Because I don't know about you, but I'm a mess too. So.
Oh yeah, we're all a mess in progress. Yeah.
Good. Okay, let's go back to your story, Ingrid, because obviously you're in horrific pain, married to a pastor. This guy's supposed to be who he's supposed to be, a man of integrity and faith, a shepherd, all of those things. He's obviously not. And then all of a sudden you've got questions. Is God good? Is God just? I'm imagining, does God even care that I'm walking through this right now? Is God real? Like, I'm sure you're having those questions too. I love that you decided to go to school to get the answers. How did God meet you? Like, obviously we know you found the answers where yes, God is just, yes, God is, but what was that process like for you?
It was a long process, and I've been through a divorce. I did remarry. I was still living in hiding because I was I didn't get out until after my first husband tried to kill me, and I was miraculously spared. So God sent someone who saved my life. But at that point, I didn't even want to be alive. I was disappointed. But God spoke to me and said, he spoke to me out of Psalm 118, you shall not die, but live and declare the works of the Lord, the glory of the Lord.
Come on.
And so it was like, all right, God must have something for this. And so, but then again, I was divorced. I remarried. He was a former Vietnam veteran. He had been a martial artist internationally. He had sparred with Chuck Norris and Bruce Lee.
Are you serious?
He had been a mercenary, and he was a brand new believer, but I felt safe. And
of course you did. Of course you did.
And God is so merciful. And we didn't even know how deeply traumatized each of us were from the things that we had been through in our lives. So it was crazy. It's nothing, there's nothing in my life up until, these current years that I would want anybody else to go through or would recommend for anybody else.
Bless your heart.
But God met me there. But I was so running from my trauma, not even realizing that that's what it was. Actually, it wasn't until my son was starting in college and was writing about trauma, because he knew both of his parents were traumatized. And he showed me a story he had written about PTSD, and he referred to his mom. And I go, what, me? And he goes, Mom, don't you know you have PTSD? And I went,
are you serious?
Yeah. He said, it's just that you handled it a lot better than Dad did. I'm like, thank you.
Right. Is that a compliment?
Yeah. So it was rough. And then, but I had thrown myself into business because, again, I thought I was disqualified from ever being in ministry. Aww. So I became a workaholic. And I finally worked myself into a disability. I was running 2 companies that I had started, and I was consulting for a third. Wow. And it would be nothing to just work until I dropped at night. Wow. And so when I did work myself into a disability, the doctor told me that I needed to take 30 days off. I quit my consulting job. That was it.
You're like, that'll be the break that I need.
That's it. I came back a month later, and he looks at me and says, you could die. And it was like, and I knew it was true because I could hardly breathe. And so I finally then asked God, what should I do? Because I'd been avoiding God. I'd been avoiding everybody. And I was certainly avoiding my own thoughts. And the Lord told me to sit in this big chair every day for an hour and just stare out the window. And I remember 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, I'm checking my
Come on.
But I knew that something had to change. And it was during that time when I just sat, I actually started to even hear my own thoughts which I didn't even realize I had been running from.
Wow.
And I eventually started being able to hear from God. And it was during that period of time. Now, I was still working because I ran the businesses, but I at least started taking time to listen. And in that process, it was during that time that God told me, started to speak to me again. And so it was, we all have an addiction of choice when we're running from our traumas.
Right.
Yeah. For me, it was my own adrenaline.
Hi, friend. Tens of thousands of people receive hope through their headphones each week by listening to the Nothing is Wasted podcast. But we know, as well as most people, that healing doesn't happen simply by listening to inspiring stories. You have to engage in deeper relational community with like-minded people who are also struggling through the journey. And you have to apply the practical tools and truths you learn from those who have gone before you. That's why we've created the Nothing is Wasted Community Plus platform. It's an ecosystem of content that you can consume through the power of targeted community. Never again will you have to say that no one understands what you're going through, because through Community Plus membership, we're bringing you both the people who get it and the content that will help you while you journey through it. For just $20 a month or $200 a year with your Community Plus membership, you'll receive access to our extensive library of bonus content, including bonus podcast episodes and on-demand mini courses. Access all of our curated pathways in their entirety, on-demand replay access to all of our exclusive events, masterclasses, live coaching, and webinars, immediate access to Position for Redemption mini course, which is normally $97, and discounts on all of our Nothing is Wasted products, events, and coaching. And if you choose the annual plan, you'll get 2 months free. What's even better is that since Nothing is Wasted Ministries is a nonprofit organization, Community Plus membership is tax deductible. I believe the Community Plus membership will be such a helpful tool for you in your pain to purpose journey. I want to give you a free 7-day trial by signing up at nothingiswasted.com/communityplus. If you're ready to partner with God to take back your story, get the resources you need to help along the way. Through encouragement and practical steps, the Community Plus platform is what you're looking for in navigating your pain to purpose journey. Go to nothingiswasted.com/communityplus and sign up now and join others who are finding hope and healing.
So during that time of sitting and just listening, it connected me to Start Seminary, which began my quest. And I knew I wanted to get answers. And that's something, and it was also a decision to face the evil and the traumas and the abuses and the hurts that I had experienced. And so often I find that that's the biggest problem, is just running from the evil, afraid to face the things that have happened. I've many times heard people say, I'm afraid if I start crying, I won't be able to stop. And so that fear of even entering into that space frequently is what will actually keep us back, hold us back from approaching it. And also, so often we're so done with God, so to speak. We think that God is the one who did it. And that was one of the biggest things that really transformed my life, was when through this. And again, it was just this for me, it was a long process because I didn't know who to go to. I didn't have answers. They weren't talking about any of these things in seminary and in church. They just want you to, the churches that I went, and I've seen some things happening, and, I've since been in churches where this isn't the case, but I call it happy clappy. They don't want to, they don't want to hear about your problems. They don't want you to come in with a sad face. Just come in and smile. And they'll say, well, just praise the Lord, and it's all just fake. So that's why, women avoid Mother's Day at church. And, that's why we avoid so many, that's why so often people avoid church and avoid Christians, because Christians in this country tend to be so uncomfortable with the suffering and the pain of others.
So true.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons that eventually I did write the book. So my dissertation was on evil in Genesis, and I was just digging in. I was asking questions, and I became no longer afraid to ask any hard question. And so that's kind of the platform in my teaching and everything. There's no question that's off limits. And in talking to anybody, no matter what they're going through, I don't care if it's a Christian calling me up and saying, I hate God. It's like, there's type people, oh, you can't say that. It's like, I'm not. Just tell what happened. Just listen and let them work it out. And that the whole genre of lament. 67 out of the 150 Psalms
Yes.
are Psalms of lament, either personal or
Yes.
corporate.
Yes.
So God gives us language. He wants us to just
That's right.
come and be honest.
That's
and for
right.
me, one of my first big breakthroughs was when I locked myself in the bathroom, even though no one was home, because I didn't know I was allowed to do this. And I raised my fist to heaven. I just started yelling at God, "You're a terrible father. You could be, and I was, it's like, okay, well, you know what I'm thinking anyway. So there, now I've said it, and I'm kind of looking around. Am I going to get struck down?
By lightning, right?
Exactly. Yeah. But that broke open honest conversation with God. And that's when I also moved me toward God wants us to be honest. I mean, the fact that God actually named the whole nation, his whole people, Israel, Jacob, he who wrestles with God, the one who strives and contends with God. That's what Israel means.
Yes.
And so if God holds that, he invites us to wrestle things through, and because he is not the one who brought the pain.
Amen.
And so in this book, so again, my dissertation, Evil in Genesis, and I had published that, but I knew that I wanted to write something that was accessible for people who don't read Hebrew, who aren't in academia,
right.
Because, and so that's why I wrote the Demystifying Evil, because I knew I just had to, because I had been preaching about it. I'd been teaching about it and speaking about it. And people were saying that it was really helpful. So I'd been doing that for, about 10 years. And I knew I had to just write it. So it's a combination of my story, how God taught me how to face evil. What is evil? Just defining evil.
Yeah.
What is good? Where is God in the midst of this? And looking at all the different places that evil comes from. And matter of fact, there was one sort of defining moment. There were several defining moments, but one of the big ones was right between finishing my Master of Divinity degree and about to start my PhD, and I was a mess. I had lost even more things. My husband, my second husband, we had a son, but he had gotten sick when our son was just 2 years old, and he was sick. Got worse and worse for 9 years. He was in constant excruciating pain. And when our son was 11, he took his life. He fought really hard.
Ingrid,
So
I didn't know that was a part of your story. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. And it was, I didn't know how to handle it at the time. I was in my second year of my MDiv program. And I had thought, once I'm in seminary, God's going to protect me. And it's like things just got,
it's all good now.
It's all good now. And other bad things were happening as well. And so, I still had so many questions, but that somewhere in between, I went to a church and I was in the worship service and my life flashed before my eyes. Now, normally that happens when you're about to die.
Yeah.
So I've done a little reading about it, but they say also if you're kind of in that state of mind, you can also have your life flash. So I was in that state of mind. But as every bad thing that ever happened to me, just these quick clips went by in my brain. What made this unique was that I saw myself also going along this path with these deep cliffs on both sides. And every time something bad happened, it would knock me off. And one side or the other. But every time I saw myself being caught by God's hand, and instead of beating myself up, because I had become really good at beating myself up. Why did you do, trying to find what I had done to cause this to happen. So I was just like Job's friends, but I was that way to myself. Yeah. And I felt completely enveloped in the love of God, which was something I had been praying for 3 years, to know the love of God. And then in the next 6 years, as I was going through coursework and as I was working on my dissertation, it was like God would stop me. I'd be in a passage and he'd stop me in a clip. One of those short clips would run through my head and he would stop and we would talk about it. He said, here's where that evil came in. And each one had a different cause. Sometimes it was my own naivete. Sometimes it was the cruelty of others. Sometimes it was just things that happen because we're in a broken, so everything had a different cause. But during that time, it was, not many people can say they were having a fantastic time writing their dissertation. It was still really hard work. but it was like I was unlocking the secrets of my own life and getting so much healing and growing and recognizing that there was something that I could do to change it. And so I came to realize, when evil hits us, how we respond to it has a huge impact as to whether the evil's going to overcome us or if we're going to overcome the evil with good. And so I started learning how to change things. And I also learned about the forces of evil, Satan, demonic power, something we don't talk about much also in the U.S.
Yeah,
We don't, but they are very real. And I have conversations with lots of people about that. So I have a section of my book on malevolent forces. And that was one of the things that I learned was that, it's not only are people doing things, and not only am I doing things that I don't even know sometimes. Sometimes I'm willfully making bad choices.
Sure.
But there's also these powers of darkness that are so clearly talked about in the New Testament. So I kind of go through what are those. And so it also became a point when I realized that there is a devil and there are forces of darkness that are out to destroy me because I am created in the image of God. And their greatest joy is to shove my face in the mud, because then they're shoving God's face in the mud. And then I got angry, and it was that really good angry. It was like
righteous anger.
Yes. Satan, you're going to pay for everything you did to me and all those that I love. And you're going to pay in spades.
Come on. I love that.
So it became that motivating force to see, how can I turn this around? And of course the Joseph story, my dissertation was in the Hebrew text of Genesis. So you get to the Joseph story, and it's like, what you intended for evil, God meant for good, that many lives would be saved. It's like, I'm going to do that as much as I can for the rest of my life. So it became this motivation.
Powerful.
So so it's like I went from being jealous at funerals because I really did not want to live. I used to say, why do I have to stay, to now it's like, God, get me to 100, get me to 120. I got so much more to do. So
wow, Ingrid. Oh man. Oh, this makes me want to cry hearing all this. I love, there's several things I love that you just said. One, I so appreciate that you're bringing up the spiritual forces of darkness, because I do think one of evil's best trick is like to erase demonic forces from our theology.
Yes.
And it's just happened in the West. Like it just has happened. And so for you to be like, no, there actually is evil. And that's not the only thing. Like when I'm defining evil, I'm not saying just that, but let's not be ignorant to the fact that there are spiritual forces of darkness. Because I love that you're like, because I'm made in the image of God. And so it's like, there's something very, anyway, I just appreciate that you said that. I also appreciate you talked about just being able to shake your fist at God, because I think we have this deeply anemic theology of suffering.
Right.
I'll sometimes read Lamentations to my church, and I'm like, you guys, Jeremiah is literally saying, God, you are like a bear who has attacked me. God, you have ripped out you have broken my bones. You have made me, like, this is the Bible,
Yes.
And I'm not sure what that is, that happy clappy tendency to ignore the reality of pain and suffering. But it has done a deep disservice, I think, to the church, to the word of God, to hurting people.
Yeah.
And so I also just appreciate that you have modeled that, and modeling this hope and this joy that you have. Like, I'm living till 100, you know? But you got there because you lamented, and you got there because you let yourself be honest with God. Finally.
Exactly.
I appreciate your push, your modeling, and even your teaching on questions. Like for our listeners, a lot of our listeners at Nothing is Wasted, do understand they can ask God their questions, but there's a difference between understanding it and then being the person who's locking the bathroom door screaming.
Yeah.
Why is it important, and how do you sort of allow yourself to get there?
Well, friends, the wait is finally over. The Nothing is Wasted book is out and available now wherever you buy books. This story is not just Amanda and my story, but it's a part of a bigger story, a story that I promise you, as you read it, it will remind you that in your story, nothing is wasted. Listen, pain is real, life is hard, but my hope is that as you read this story, you'll be able to see the ways in which God is showing up for you, and he's walking you through, sometimes carrying through the valley, no matter what you face, and that he always is with you. I'm so grateful for you being a part of this Nothing is Wasted community and for you being a part of my healing journey. And I can't wait for you to get a copy of Nothing is Wasted, the book. You can go to nothingiswastedbook.com to order your copy now. You can buy it anywhere books are on sale. And you can also pick up an audiobook if you can stand to hear me reading the book to you. I'm so grateful for you, and I'm excited to hear how this book is impacting you in your own personal journey. Nothingiswastedbook.com. Pick it up today and let us know how it's impacting you.
Yeah, and some of it, what you just said, allowing ourselves to get there, but recognizing, even just reading through the Psalms, reading through Lamentations, and looking at the rawness and some of the stuff that you read, it's like, oh, well, that's terrible. How can they say that? It's like, because that's how they feel. And that's what they've experienced. These were people who had experienced invaders coming and ripping babies out of the pregnant, they had experienced seeing that. Yeah. And so it was so real. And so the fact that they were able to just, to want to see that, but then to also understand lament isn't part of lament. What's beautiful about lament is you're actually, even if you're yelling at God, you're still talking to him.
To God.
Yes. Yep. We'll go and talk to everybody else, but God says, come and talk to me about it, because they're not going to have the answers most likely unless they're really hearing well from me. And so it's talking to God and talking to God with friends. So that's why there's individual and corporate lament. Sometimes we just need to fight it out, but recognizing that. But there's this terrible theology that God is responsible for all the evil. And that just,
Say more about that. Talk about that.
Yes. And I had actually come to believe that because of certain professors that I had, that, the Lord gives, the Lord takes away, blessed be the name of the Lord. And, and yes, that's a verse in scripture, but if you take that out of context and just land there, it's like they forget, and there's so much that is being ignored, and it's so vilifies God's character.
That's
because yes, because the original in the garden in Genesis chapter 3, the big main thing that the serpent was doing, he was coming against God's character. He was telling them God isn't really good. God is withholding something that you really need, that's really good for you. So you can't trust God. Not only that, God is a liar. You can't trust what he says. You can't trust who he is. You can't trust that he wants good for you. And you look in Genesis 2 and 3. I mean, Genesis 2, everything. The first time the word command is used, I command you. If you had asked me before I'd studied it, I would have said, oh, don't eat from that tree. But no, the first time the word command is used, it's God saying, of all the trees in the garden, eat freely. That's his first command. Look at everything. I've given you everything. You're lacking nothing. And I will give you even more. And it was just a second, but just one tree out of these thousands, millions, however many trees, there's just one. And these trees represent our ability to make choices. And that's what it's saying. You have the ability to make choices. You can either choose me and the abundance and walking with me in the garden and enjoying everything that I've given you, or you can turn and look at one thing, because the trees, they represent the fact that we are moral creatures. So if you think of God as the most powerful being in the universe, God is almighty, all powerful, how would you create a world, a universe? What system would you set up? And God set up a system of a divine council once he started creating their spiritual divine council. And we were his image bearers, because God didn't set things up to show his power. He set things up to show his character. And you can never prove character through power.
Come on. Say that again, Dr. Faro.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. God was determined to give us, both his spiritual beings and us human beings, the freedom of choice to choose him freely. Also, one of the things, as I was even working on the book, it became so clear. I do a lot of speaking on abuse and so forth. And it just hit me. God, the three words that are frequently associated with abuse. And that's, manipulation, intimidation, domination. And I realized God is not an abuser. God will never manipulate us, even if it's for our own good. He's not going to intimidate us. He's not going to dominate us. God is not an abuser. And even though it costs him, because it cost him everything, because he refuses to manipulate us. He tries to show us his goodness. He says, come to, Jesus, come to me, all you who are laboring, and come and I will give you rest, because I am gentle and lowly. And that word gentle is having an honest assessment of yourself. And, we have to have an honest assessment of ourselves. Hey, I'm a mess, and this is a mess, and that person's a mess, and this isn't right. Things, like Cornelius Plantinga, the philosopher, says things are not the way they're supposed to be. And once we can recognize that, and as soon as we start to recognize things are not the way they're supposed to be, we're supposed to actually make use of the Lord's Prayer, which is, Lord, you are holy and set apart, but I want your kingdom to come and your will to be done here in my circumstances as you want it to be done in heaven. So that means it's an invitation. God invites us to figure out, okay, this is not the way it's supposed to be. So I'm going to go before the Heavenly Father and I'm going to say, Lord, you show, how are things supposed to be? And he gives us his word. And he will never contradict his word, because his word, it's, and he speaks, we have, especially as believers, we have the Holy Spirit, and we're supposed to say, okay, how are things? But to do that, we also have to come to know God's character. So how does anybody build a relationship with anybody? You communicate. That's the first thing.
That's good.
Yeah. And so if we don't communicate honestly, we're hiding. And we're also not trusting that person enough to be honest. So taking that risk to be honest with God is actually the first step in building a real relationship. And you need that in order to build trust. And if you don't know if you can trust him, that's, you just start with whatever. Okay, God, I'm going to trust you just this much. I'm going to give you this little bitty piece of hair of trust, and I'm going to see what you do with it. And God's not offended. You see the people who came to Jesus for healing or whatever it was. And sometimes he would challenge them, but he never sent them away and said, well, you're just, he would say you don't have much faith, but he'd heal them anyway to spur them on to more. He never said no. He never broke it. Jesus said, if you've seen, I'm going on a rant. Jesus
I love it. You're preaching, Ingrid.
Jesus said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And so if we really want to know what God's like, because everybody had such a bad idea of who God is, and we still tend to look at Jesus. Did he ever break anybody's arm? Did he ever give anybody cancer? Did he ever come and take everything that they had?
No, he did not.
He did not. He never had anybody rape it. All he did was come in and heal. And whatever degree of faith or lack of faith anybody came to him with, it's just, let me just touch the hem of his garment so that nobody can see. And power went out of him, and he called her daughter. So wherever anybody was at, he went about doing good. And the only ones he criticized were the hypocrites who said, I'm better than you are.
That's right. Wow.
Yeah. And he just set them straight. So, yeah.
It strikes me as you were talking about God's first commands being eat freely and all these things you're saying about Jesus. Jesus is like, come to me freely, ask freely, lament freely, metaphorically, eat freely of me. And that's what you're saying. Like when we're in these wrestling hard places, like Jesus is like, just come freely with all of it, all of it. I am not going to brush you aside. I'm not going to hurt you more. Oh, I so appreciate that, that image of who God is and who God has always been. Yeah. And then we see it in Jesus. Yeah. I don't want to forget to mention this. I've got some more questions for you, Ingrid, but you have your book, Demystifying Evil, which is wonderful. And then a class at seminary now. It's a course I watched it all in like 45 minutes. It's so, I could not stop watching it. It's, you can go to seminary. We'll put this all in the show notes. You can go to seminarynow.com, and there's actually a link our listeners can use and a code our listener can use. I think it's Aubrey25 to get a discount, but your course is phenomenal because you unpacked these concepts around what is evil, what can we even do about evil, is God good, how do you wrestle with all of it? And it's seminary level material, but it's in these little like 8-minute sections, blocks. I don't even know, courses, I suppose, but it's all one course. But I would highly recommend it to our listeners. It's so, so good. So thank you for your work on that, for condensing all of your research and putting it into that. It's really powerful.
Thank you.
Okay, you've shared a lot of your trauma, and I know we've got a lot of listeners who are in trauma. Either perhaps they heard your story about your abusive husband, abusive marriage, and they're like, that's me and I don't know how to get out. Or they've lost somebody in a really tragic way, like a suicide, like you've been through, or they've wrestled with pain, they've wrestled with heartache. A lot of our listeners are in deep trauma or tragedy or a major life transition, or they're walking with someone who is. And part of what I appreciate about you is that it's not just it. I mean, the research really matters. It's so helpful because you're unpacking the Bible in tremendous ways, but you're also you have such a shepherd's heart, Dr. Faro. And so I guess I would just love to give you a chance to speak to that hurting person or that person who feels stuck in their pain.
Yeah.
What's a word for them?
Yeah, it's begin somewhere. Just take the tiniest step, and no matter how alienated you feel from God, no matter how angry, no matter how hurt, it's God actually does love you. And even if that sounds like when you hear it, you just kind of go, sure, because I remember doing that. But first, just be honest. First step I suggest is just tell God exactly how you feel.
That's good.
Even if no matter what anybody else thinks. And then if you can find someone that you can be honest with, that you trust, that you know is a solid person, somebody that you can rely on. And I do recommend trauma counseling. Now, if you talk to somebody, whether it's, who dismisses you or drives you further away from God or makes you feel worse, then just stop, find somebody else.
Good for you. Yeah.
Yeah. But just ask God to lead you. Just say, God, I need someone to walk with me through this, because it is generally too hard to walk through it alone.
Yeah.
But start just having a conversation with God, being honest, be honest with yourself, be honest with your feelings. Feelings are flags to show that something's wrong. So don't call any feelings. It's not a bad feeling. It's how you feel.
Yeah.
And so we have to look at it. God gave us feelings. God has feelings, and we have feelings that are saying, hey, something's wrong here. This needs attention, just like a physical pain. If you have physical pain, it's like, oh, I better do something about that. Same with heart pain. It means you got to do something about it. And but there's no pain. I remember Corrie ten Boom. She was a World War II survivor and all that. And I remember her saying, there's no pit so deep that God is not deeper still. And I remember in that time when I was just sitting in my big chair, and I remember feeling pain because I had so numbed myself from work that I didn't want to feel anything. But I remember feeling pain. And when I allowed myself to feel pain, I realized if I can feel this much pain, then maybe I'm capable of feeling this much joy and happiness too.
Wow.
Because if you can't feel pain, you're not going to feel joy and happiness either. And so feeling pain is sometimes that first step toward just taking out that sword that's that arrowhead that's in your heart. And when we think of when Jesus gave his mission statement, it's in Luke 4, and he's quoting from Isaiah 61. And the first sign that he is the promised one is that he will heal the brokenhearted.
Come on.
And it's a shattered, it's where your life has just been shattered.
Yeah.
And God can heal it. And I'm a example number one. I was afraid of everything and everybody. I was so broken, but no matter how long the journey seems, it's just like, take a teeny step.
Yeah.
And just because the only other option is to die where you're at. And I remember once the Lord spoke to me, Psalm 23, verse 4. Everybody knows Psalm 23 pretty much. And, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. I'm thinking, yeah, that's a nice verse. And all of a sudden, the next thing I heard was, don't lay down in the valley of the shadow. Don't set up your camp here.
Oh.
Don't stay there. I am with you to bring you through this. Fear nothing bad. I'm with you to bring you through. And it was like, that is what changes everything. You're not in this alone. Don't isolate. Abusers isolate. Don't isolate from God. Find somebody. God will lead you to somebody who will hold your hand and help you walk through it too.
Oh, thank you for that, Ingrid. It's so beautiful. I appreciate that so much. That's such a good word. Jim, I'm going to ask you a couple more questions. Is that okay? You're all right on time?
Sure.
Okay. Don't want to give away your book, Ingrid, but what is evil?
Yeah. And that's, evil, as I wrestled with definitions. So sort of my short definition, evil is the corruption of God's creational and relational goodness. Evil is not the absence of evil. Evil gets its power from taking what is good, what God intended and created to be good, and twisting it, polluting it. It's like rat poison is 98% good food and just 2% poison. So it's just enough to attract. And so it's like love is supposed to be, love can be the most glorious, wonderful thing. But if somebody says, I love you, and first they love you because they want you to flourish, and, that's great. But if now I love you, you must be mine. I'm going to take you. And if you're not mine, I'm going to destroy you. It's taking that force that was intended for good, corrupting it, polluting it, and so that you want it for yourself. So evil has that sense of corruption, taking for myself what's supposed to be freely given and freely enjoyed. And so so that's kind of the short definition.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And if we recognize evil at work in the world, or perhaps through a person in our lives, one of the things that you talked about in your own story, but I know you often talk about, is like kind of our role in pushing back evil or fighting back evil. What do we do?
Hey, Nothing is Wasted family. Are you walking through a specific valley, looking for resources to help you in your pain? I think we can all attest to the fact that there is comfort in hearing from those who have walked a similar path and have found hope and healing on the other side. That is why we have created collections of resources called Curated Pathways to help you navigate your specific pain point. With curated pathways on topics like grief, child loss, sexual betrayal, childhood trauma, widowhood, and more, we've compiled the very best resources from Nothing is Wasted all in one place that will speak directly to what you are experiencing right now. Our curated pathways will give you access to everything we've created, from past podcast episodes to bonus content and our masterclasses, live coaching, and everything in between. When you're facing a crisis, loss, or trauma, you don't have the time or energy to search for what could help you heal. You can get a taste of what our curated pathways have to offer by going to nothingiswasted.com/pathways. But if you're ready to go to the next level on your healing journey, you can access the full library of our resources, including the entire curated pathway you're looking for, by becoming a Community Plus member. For just $20 a month or $200 a year, you'll have access to the complete collection of Nothing is Wasted's curated pathways. As a Community Plus member, you'll be able to access a new curated pathway each month as our collection grows. Our team has been working very hard on this to catalog, index, organize, and distribute our library of content in a way that will be most helpful to you. We know what it is like to face pain, and we want to equip you with the tools you need to find hope and healing as you move from pain to purpose. Join Community Plus today at nothingiswasted.com/Community Plus and partner with God to take back your story.
Yeah. And when we see something is not the way it's supposed to be, so it's again, and in the book I talk about what is goodness, because we need to understand what is goodness before we can really even understand what is evil. And the words associated with goodness are abundance and flourishing and life-giving and joy and growth. And so, and I add more adjectives, but when we recognize something is not that, then it's not the way it's supposed to be. And then I need to, again, this is what I do now. It's like, okay, Lord, this is not the way it's supposed to be. What is it that you want me to do? Or am I supposed to find someone else? But this, I'm not going to tolerate if it's something within my domain, something that I have some influence over. We also have to recognize if it's something I have no influence over, then maybe find somebody else that can intervene there. But when it's something within my domain, my sphere of living and life, then it's like, all right, this has happened on my ground.
Yeah.
And where God has placed me, I'm not putting up with this.
I love that.
Yeah. And so then I want to get God, what's your strategy? What's the first thing that I do? And, I want to check my own heart. But, if I have feelings about it, that's okay. I go to God with those and I evaluate, what are triggers and what are, what's just the healthy anger, that will help propel me and, and sort of, and get God's strategy.
Yeah.
And then, especially if you can then find someone that you can pray with in that situation where you can both help each other to discern. I ask for wisdom, I ask for discernment, and I ask for a plan. And then I ask for his strength to carry out his wisdom in the situation and try to get a vision of what is this supposed to look like? How do you want to turn this thing that is not the way it's supposed to be? How is it supposed to be? Yeah. And so, I went through that in my work situation and we got to see God act in amazing ways and just decided we're not going to quit because things are not yet the way they're supposed to be. So sometimes you have to leave, like there's situations, if it's abuse or, sometimes you have to just get out. And sometimes you got to set boundaries and things like that. It's not a problem. Yeah. But the main reason there's evil is because somebody let it happen. It's like, there's different ways of quoting this, but essentially different famous people have said it. But, all it takes for evil men to succeed is for good people to stand by and do nothing. Yeah, and so we don't want to be those that stand by and do nothing. Yeah. Sometimes it has to be somebody else and we may need to go to somebody. Sometimes we need to just step away if it's something that, but again, don't take it. That was one of the other things I learned, with my first husband. It's neither good nor nice to allow evil to run over you.
Come on, that's good.
Yes. Do not allow evil to run over you. That is not the suffering that Jesus calls us to.
That is right. Good. Yeah. Okay, Ingrid, I know I said two more questions. I got to ask you one more because I do want to come. I want to come sort of full circle to your story and where you are now, because obviously God has brought you through such a journey. Lots of pain, you exploring, you wrestling, you crying out, God meeting you in such personal ways. Literally you said this, it was his presence that met you again. And you remembered, oh yeah, God, you're good. And you love me and you're with me. Talk about life now.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, so life continues to have some challenges. I just approach them very differently. So now when something goes wrong, sometimes I'll still be, it's like, someone who hurt you that you thought was a really good friend and starts slandering you and stuff. And, you're like, it kind of have to catch your breath, but it's like, all right, this is not, especially, somebody who's a Christian leader or something. And you're like, and so, so we still have things come against us because as Jesus said, in this world, you will have tribulation, but he also says, bless those that curse you, pray for those that despitefully use you and say all manner of evil against you falsely. So I got to apply that one in a more recent situation.
Awesome. Fun.
Yay. But now, I may have to take a step back. I've got to go to prayer because, first I want to, just come out swinging.
Yep, totally.
Yep. And it's like, all right, Lord, so I've got to talk to a couple of pray, talk to a couple of trusted friends, get my heart right before God and then say, okay, how do you want me to handle the situation? Yeah. And so, but I'm a professor of Old Testament, which is something that, I'm just so thrilled and thankful for. I love teaching. I love working with the students. I've got 2 great kids. I've got 4 grandchildren. I just had my 4th. It'll be my last grandchild.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. And, I just absolutely love, I love my family, we've all got our struggles and so forth, but I know better how to pray, how to love well, how to be with them, how to not give advice when it's not asked for, because you just can't do that with adult kids. You can't do that with most people.
I love my parents, but I don't know if they've learned that lesson.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Yep. I'm like, I've had to learn if they don't ask, I'll just love them and ask them how things are going. And and so but God had to teach me about manipulation. I had to learn that with my own kids. I remember when my son was, in his late teens and he had dropped out of school because, we'd had so many hard things happen. And I remember God saying, I had done this really manipulative thing with my son, oh, you're breaking your mother's heart kind of stuff, and the Lord called, he said, have I ever manipulated you? Have I ever said something like that to you? And I'm like, ooh, so I had to go and ask my son's forgiveness and encourage, say, if I ever manipulate you, I want you to call me out. I remember the first time he did, he goes, Mom, didn't realize how passive aggressive you could be. And I'm like, hold it. Thank you, son. Help me to do this better.
Wow.
So we have, got good relationships. I've got friends all over the globe, which I'm thankful for.
Yeah.
There's still some, I've had heartache and, there's still things, but it's like, but I know God is good. I know he's faithful, and I just keep expecting. There was a time in my life that I expected, I called it whack-a-mole theology, because every time I put my head up, I expected to be knocked down again. Yeah. And God had to change me to a shalom theology where I expect to see the goodness of the Lord. And if I don't see it all in my time, my kids will see it, but I expect the goodness of the Lord. And so there's still more that I'm hoping for and expecting for and praying for. But I have come to the place where I have this beautiful ongoing conversation with God during the day. So when things happen, I can just turn and say, okay. And I can be honest that, like I had this thing happen. I said, really? Did I need this too? It's like, really? So I'm still just as honest with him. I'm, completely, but then, then he'll show me. And I remember last time I threw myself a pity party, because I've done that,
Yeah, I do that.
But now I invite God. I say, you come join. I'm having a pity party.
You're invited.
You're invited, And,
that's so good.
Yeah. And so he'll still meet me there. So I'm just, I just keep seeing more, but I also keep seeing more and more opportunities as I heal in new ways to also bring healing to other people. And that is such a joy, and make deeper friendships. And, so I love deeply, and I'm deeply loved. And, again, still things that happen.
Yes.
But, but I face it completely different than I would have, 15, 20 years ago.
Wow. Oh, Ingrid, thank you so much for being here today, sharing so much of your wisdom and your own personal story. I've been really encouraged. I know our audience is as well. Where can our listeners find you, follow along with all that you're doing? Where can they get a copy of Demystifying Evil and your other books and all of those fun things?
Yeah, I do have a website. I'm really bad. I haven't updated it, but it's ingridfaro.com, but at least it has my contact information.
Perfect.
And also YouTube, if you just put in Ingrid Faro, a lot of my talks and things like that are on YouTube also. And, again, I'm at Northern Seminary, so, people can audit classes and things like that.
My husband is actually a doctoral student at Northern right now in contextual theology. So I'll have to tell him to come find you at some point.
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks
so much.
Ingrid. Appreciate you.
I appreciate you. Thanks, Aubrey.
Well, hey, thanks so much for joining us for today's episode of the Nothing is Wasted podcast. We hope you enjoyed it and found it as encouraging and insightful as we did. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever it is you like to listen. We would love for you to rate and review as well. Your feedback actually helps us connect with listeners who need hope and healing, listeners just like you. And so we'd love to invite you to do that. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can follow the show notes for that, or you can just go on the YouTube app and search for us. We also love connecting with you on social media. We love engaging with you there and hearing your stories of how God is using these stories to encourage you. So you can follow the ministry at Nothing is Wasted Ministries. You can follow me at ObSamp, and you can follow Davey at Davey Blackburn. Send us messages. We want to hear from you. And look, if you want to hear more about what we have here, the incredible resources that we have available to you at Nothing is Wasted to help you navigate whatever valley you're walking through, we want to invite you to visit our website, nothingiswasted.com. And if you're ready to start in your journey towards healing, go to nothingiswasted.com/start here for your next step. As always, we want to thank Sleeping at Last for providing all of the music on the podcast. We want to thank you, our Nothing is Wasted community. We want to thank our incredible guests. And remember, no matter what challenges you are walking through, nothing is wasted. Hey, thanks again for being here. We want to invite you to join us next time for an incredible conversation here on the Nothing is Wasted podcast. But before you go, check out a short clip from our next episode. Thanks for joining us, friends.
And I think what you're describing is what Scripture will call, the groans of childbirth, that the earth is groaning right now, these pains of childbirth, and hasn't yet experienced this new life, but it's in, almost to allude to what you were talking about earlier, that kind of death right before the new life. And we're experiencing it on a macro level with the seasons changing and God's story reminding us. You're experiencing it as you described in your own body with some of the stuff that you have gone through personally.
Yeah.
And it's all awaiting this moment that Jesus is going to wipe away every tear and make everything right and set all of this straight again.
It's right that the longing is there. I can't remember who said that, but it's like the fact that our hearts yearn for something that we don't see yet is evidence that we're made for something more. And
so good.
I think about constellations. I wrote that song with John Guerra, who, gosh, if you do not know his music, and David Leonard
John's
too.
Amazing.
Both of them, are just like deep water souls. Yeah. But we were, you get in a co-write and you're like, how's everybody been? And we were all like, whoa, like we have been walking through heavy things.
Oh, man.
And so Constellations was born out of that. And that was written John and I were just writing again for a new record that I'm working on, but we were looking back on that song and marveling over the fact that we wrote it at the end of 2019, having no idea what we were all about to walk through, and just how kind God is to write in all kinds of ways, like whether it's through us walking through our own sorrow and writing a song out of that, whether it's you, Davey, walking through the suffering that you've walked through and starting a podcast where people can share their stories about God meeting us and not wasting our pain.